Hello everyone, welcome back. We're going to get started here in just a moment with what I'm going to call just green purple or emerald amethyst, a deck popularized pretty much almost entirely for set 3 by Artifacts. Credit goes to him for the base of the list there. He's done pretty much all the work for set 3 Emerald Amethyst, and he's kind of set the tone by doing so well in some of the online Tia Beasley events that it's really hard to argue with his results here. This is relatively stock. Again, I'm going through all the decks I think are respectable for the Atlanta Challenge, and this is one of them. This is definitely a deck that has seen a lot of play over the course of the format and has really come into fruition as one of the big counters to Ruby Sapphire, that kind of the premier control deck that I think a lot of people are going to be playing at the event. This is a slight variation of it. Again, I'm giving you some insight into what I would be playing if I was playing this exact archetype, which the full reveal of what I'm going to be playing is be posted on Friday for those who are members of the Patreon. You could see that before, full 24 hours before the deck submissions can put in there. So any kind of consideration for that, go for it. But let's start off with some of the cards there. To start off, really, there's hard to argue with Curse, Merfolk, Rafiki, Pascal. They're all, one cost characters, which in their own right can do a lot of, legwork in the sense. Curse, Merfolk being what we've seen as the most aggressive character in the game. There are comparables in the Maleficent and Lilo one-cost characters that are ones that for one that quest for two, but really the ability to hit cards at your opponent's hand, having that one-cost character that gains two or actually trade for something, where Lilo and Maleficent rarely ever actually traded for a card, is why Curse Merfolk is so good, even though it dies to every challenge that it plays. It's making sure that no matter what, you're getting a card out of what your opponent's putting into it, and it does, especially in the early game, kind of mess with a lot of people's game plans to develop their board and keep cards in their hand to go into the later game. So Curse Merfolk, 4 of in every kind of Emerald-based aggressive deck. Even in some of the ones that aren't aggressive, I'd probably suggest just putting in some Curse Merfolks because of how good the card is. Really hard to argue there with anything in that sense. Now, I know through the format's evolution, cards like Pascal have kind of come up a bit more than we've seen in the prior. It's a card that does a really good job of checking Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer in conjunction with Merlin Crab, but it also just being really hard for a lot of decks to quest with or to challenge into. It can keep questing kind of freely there, and you really do need a critical mass of one-cost characters in this type of deck to really get under your opponents, and Pascal does a good job of kind of dodging a lot of things that your opponents can play. Rafiki, a key piece there at challenging a lot of things with 3 health, one-cost challenger, much like Captain Hook from set 1, something we've seen and really do, that's kind of the baseline for what one-cost challengers do look like. They deal 3, they're pretty hard to kind of incentivize to attack, but they also, if they're challenged, kind of die pretty easily, much like Captain Hook we saw a lot of. But those are the baseline characters. I think 10, maybe 11 is correct for how you want to start this deck. It's hard to fit room for all the specifics, but that's really where you'd start with any type of aggressive deck, is at least 10 characters there. 9 if you're controlling on the controlling side, and 11 or 12 if you're more aggressive. Is really how this game is really developed. It's how the curves look. 2-cost Cusco replaces itself, much like the same logic behind Curse Merfolk, where you're having it always at least trade for a card. Cusco is actually something that's not always easy to challenge into, mainly because it leaves yourself open to be challenged back with cards like Rafiki from a stronger character. Cusco always replacing itself, being the only thing you can play on turn 2, which this deck isn't really falling short of. There's plenty of 2-drops in this color pair. We've seen more Cuscos in Ruby Amethyst than in Emerald Amethyst, but still a fine card, and it lets you something to develop into cards like Be Prepared that you don't really care if get hit, but also apply a little bit more pressure if they don't have it. So it's a good replaceable card. We haven't really seen too many decks play 4 of it, Cusco, the 2-cost, just because it is kind of a throwaway card, but it's great ink. That's always the benefit to cards like that early on. This deck being the first Amethyst deck we're reviewing here for competitive play, we're going to see the 16 cards, which I'm just going to go through really quick, that are all part of the same deck, that are part of a core package, which I don't think you can trim on, shave on, or should in any way, shape, or form. And that is Mim Snake, Mim Fox, Merlin Goat, and Merlin Crab. Or not Merlin Crab, Merlin Rabbit. Crab is hit or miss. It's kind of woven its way into set 3 metagame of being a staple of that package there. But really the reason to play Amethyst is Merlin Goat, Merlin Rabbit, Mim Fox, and Mim Snake. The bounce package, if you will. Those 16 cards are incredible. I think that when they designed the cards, they thought of the return a character to your hand part of the card as more of a drawback than it actually is. Granted, you do lose tempo, but they are statted in such a way that the tempo isn't really felt. And the upside is the downside is really an upside. on those cards, being able to return damaged characters, return characters with enters play effects, or leaves play effects in the case of the goats and the rabbits and the crabs. Not really much to say. I think that every Amethyst deck that's playing this event should be playing all 16 of those, both snake and fox, both goat and rabbit, and some number of crabs probably. Really hard to argue with those kind of decks or those kind of cards, and the key piece of them is really the fact that they're both an aggressive game plan to threaten board control, with Mim Fox and Mim Snake being very good stats, and rush on a Mim Fox is incredible. And you can even loop, Mim Foxes if you have two of them. If they have a board with a bunch of 2 strength characters that are exerted, you kind of just get to pay 3 over and over again to deal 4 to them, and it's really hard to break out of that in a lot of ways without cards like Whole New World or other ways to discard. But also the fact that you can turn into this huge grind plan with Merlin Rabbit, where you never expose your rabbit to any remove on their turn. You only ever play rabbit when you can then return it immediately with the fox or a snake. That's a key part of, I would say, Ruby Amethyst mirror matches, is protecting the ability to rabbit. You never really want to expose it beyond turn 5 when they can kill it with a Tremaine or Medusa on the board, or even a Pinocchio if they have a Merlin in play, or sorry, if they have a Rafiki in play. But protecting the rabbit is a key part of a lot of mirror matches, where if you have one and they don't, you're probably going to win. It's almost worth against Ruby Amethyst keeping cards like Merlin Rabbit because of how important it is. Just one of the best cards in the game, and it's really insane how much card advantage that the deck can grind out, even though it's an aggressive deck. But kind of circling back from those package of 16, which we stemmed off of the snake here, there's one copy of Pinocchio. My personal taste is that this card, in a lot of versions that, again, going to shout out Tartabacks there for, would be the 4th copy of Mother Knows Best. I think that for Mother Knows Best can be a little bit, while it is good in most matchups because you can always use it to return cards like Merlin Goat or Merlin Rabbit to do an impression that a fox or a snake would, I think it's a little bit overkill for a lot of matchups, and Pinocchio is very good, especially even in the mirror match, being able to answer an Ursula or being able to loop it over and over again with a Mim or a fox or a snake there. Being able to keep a Pinocchio going, I could even see playing 2 in some instances. It's just an incredibly powerful card, where really the role you want to play is defined by how many of those you include. I would say being more aggressive, you might want more Mother Knows Best, but it is uninkable. They both are, and they can really really lead to situations where you're kind of either out or you have the wrong piece at the wrong time, and they don't really work out that well. But I've decided to remove one Mother Knows Best for Pinocchio. Personal preference there. I know a lot of people locally. I've played some of the Stitch Championships, did that change. I think they're playing pretty much this exact deck, and they won several Stitches that way. And the Pinocchio was certainly something I think they went up to 2 of. I don't remember what they removed, but it's a solid card. I think it's worth an inclusion there. And at least if your opponent does see it, they have to respect it for basically the entire match, which is kind of cool. Having just a one-of card that, if shown, is very impactful in how they make decisions. Kind of next up here, Flynn Rider, kind of combining with Curse and Revoke as the 2 most aggressive cards in the game for questing. Really something you can quest into basically anything if they have cards in hand, and they're reluctant to attack it, even when it's a beneficial trade for them, because it is putting them down on cards, and it can be a game changer in the lore race. And a play pattern you might often see also is playing to defend the board early with cards like Rafiki and Madam Snake, and then on turn 4, you just go Flynn, Merfolk, and then it's 6 lore for very cheap cost. Merfolk's deceptively powerful in the later parts of the game too, just for being a single card for 2 lore, and same thing with Flynn to a lesser extent because of its costing 1 more, but the inkability part of it really takes it away, sets it apart from the rest. Ursula and Ursula, the package there, the 2. 2-cost Ursula is probably one of the best cards in the game. It's in the top 10 for sure as far as impactful cards. You'll take songs, which are very prevalent in pretty much every deck that you can play against in the game, whether it be Amber Steel, Ruby Amethyst, Ruby Sapphire, a mirror match of some type, a green steel, anything like that. Ursula has targets in every matchup, and that's why it's so good. Maybe not against Mufasa, which we went with previous to this, but that's the only deck that really kind of dodges it entirely. And being able to strip cards from your opponent's hand is a huge part of it. It's really warped the game around Emerald's ability to do that. So much so that even when I'm playing Amber Steel, I look to mulligan away cards like Let the Storm Rage On, which are traditionally very good against decks with Curse, Merfolk, and Flynn Rider, because if it gets taken by an Ursula when they don't have anything in play, or even if I'm going second, I can't even sing it with my Cinderella. So devastating to be down that full card, just because of how important every card is in this game by compared to other card games, which in other card games there's usually an excess of one type of resource, whether it be lands or spells. Comparing it to Magic, having the ability to make an easy decision of what to discard makes the inking part of this game the real skill tester. And Ursula throwing a wrench into that, being able to take cards in their hand and then maybe have them have to use one of the key resources they'd want later in the game as an ink. Ursula is just incredible. Don't need to harp on it anymore, but definitely one of the best cards in the game, and one of the best reasons, or one of the biggest reasons to play Emerald in general. We already discussed Mim Fox, which I would argue is the best card in the game still. Even with set 4, I think it's still close to the best card, if not the best card in the game still. My ranking system is Mim Fox, Maui, and there's a couple cards right beneath it that are all vying for the next spot. Ursula is one of them. Ursula 2 cost, I should say, is one of them, just for generic power level. And yeah, those are some of the most powerful cards in the game. We've already went over Mim Fox and how incredible that package of 16 Amethyst cards are. Basically, every Amethyst deck that isn't Jafar, I guess, starts with those 16 cards because of how incredible they are. And most of them are inkable, except for the Rabbit, which is arguably one of the better ones of them, being able to draw cards late, and one of the more important ones to protect. They're all inkable, too. So if they're not good, they're still good. Maleficent 3 cost, extra copies of Merlin, and also this deck kind of lacks proactive 3s that aren't Ursula, and sometimes Ursula isn't always, at the greatest. It is something that's a bit odd for this deck, as there are only 7 songs for it to copy, but when it does copy them, it's so powerful that Ursula warrants its inclusion here. Deceiver of All, just drawing 4 cards off friends on the other side, and then being able to use them to either you can pick this card back up since it's exerted with a Mim Snake or Mim Fox, and you're likely to have found something like that if you didn't already with the friends on the other side. Or Mother Knows Besting 2 things can be beyond devastating, whether it be a tempo weapon against some more expensive characters that don't have strict ETB effects such as Sad Beast or Robin Hood. Those things are prime Mother Knows Best targets, and one of the reasons that you want that card. But also late in the game, say you have the ability to develop a snake and then a goat, and then replay the goat, and then you can just use Ursula to single Mother Knows Best, bounce the snake and the goat, and that's just an incredible amount of lore that your opponent can't interact with that well. Maleficent's kind of a complement to that stash there of 3 cost plays you can make that do impact the board and can sing friends on the other side pretty well. Back if you were looking at me in set 1, would I have ever cut a Maleficent 3? Probably not, but we've moved on from that era, and we've kind of gotten to this point where there are more impressive cards, but still warrants a slot. It's a great top deck late in the game if you've run out of resources. Just keep the chain going, and one of the most demoralizing things you can do to your opponent is late in the game, bunch of ink, both in top deck war, Maleficent into something else, or Maleficent into Rabbit, or Maleficent into Mim and Fox and Snake. They're really just combos with everything. So warrants an inclusion. Not the 4 of it used to be, but still powerful. This expansion particularly, starting in set 3, we've seen an uptick in Merlin Crabs. They're helping primarily to deal with opposing locations and large characters. The reason they're so good at dealing with large characters is with Crab you can, even from an empty board, play it and then play a Mim Fox, and upon leaving, the Crab will give the Fox +3, making it a 7th strength rush character for functionally 6 ink, which is enough to challenge a Queen's Castle. And why Queen's Castle isn't actually that important in a lot of Amethyst mirror matches is because of the threat of a Mim Fox with a Merlin in play to really take it out in one shot. But Crab warrants inclusion there, helps a lot of your smaller things trade up against some of the bigger things like Flavorsham, Haran Flavorsham being a 6 health, combines with Rafiki really nicely, combines with Snake really nicely to just take it out. And it's something that I think we should have seen more of in set 2, but really didn't, just because of the powerful sweepers that Ruby Amethyst had. It didn't really come down to locations that much either, and combat didn't happen too much because of cards like Arthur and things that saw more play before set 3. But definitely an inclusive card here, and definitely something I would expect most versions of Amethyst decks to play at least 3 of, whether it be Ruby Amethyst or Emerald Amethyst. So yeah. Cloud Kicker, tough guy. Pretty important in mirror matches. Aside from Pinocchio tapping something down or Mother Knows Best just being cast on turn 3, being able to answer an Ursula Deceiver All when going second is relatively important. It is a card that helps snowball a giant amount of advantage, and sometimes the tempo of a single turn, making them have to play it again on turn 4, is enough to really seal a deal there. And having access to a few of these is pretty important, since you can loop them later in the game as well with a Mim Fox or a Snake to kind of keep this card off indefinitely while developing your own game plan. You could see more instances of it, you could see less. It really depends on the metagame you're playing against. If you knew you're going to play against a bunch of decks with Ursula, I would advise playing more. Kit, I would probably say about 3. 3 is the maximum I would go, and wouldn't play 4, but it's certainly important to answer Ursula when going second. And you are going to be playing half your games going second, so it's a possibility that you want to have a third copy over some some card here. It's hard to really tell which one. They all serve, a similar kind of, they all serve their unique individual roles. And with cards like Ursula the Deceiver, the 2-cost, there are other ways to help answer an Ursula Deceiver Ball, because the threat of keeping songs in your hand to pair with an Ursula is so high in the mirror match because of Ursula 2-cost, one of your primary cards that you can reuse even if you miss on turn 2, on turn 4 with a snake. It's hard to really, say that this is a dominant strategy, but something you have to be aware of is that leaving one of these in play is threatening at all times. We went over Merlin Goat and Merlin Crab, some of the best Amethyst cards in the game. Something you really help to grind your way out of a hole, or to just help close the game is just saving your goats, and you often won't ink them at certain matchups just to make sure that you have the ability to threaten. Not really leaving it exposed. You want to keep your snakes and your foxes, or even a Mother Knows Best against Ruby Sapphire to help close the game. Don't ever let them kind of Maui it. Don't ever let them Tremaine it or Maleficent Dragon it. You just want to keep this going until you win the game with it eventually. By playing it and then immediately bouncing it, and then they have to deal with the threat that you left in play, whether it be a snake or a fox. And then whenever another one comes along, or if you really need to commit it, it's 2 lore at that point. And sometimes they can't close the game quick enough, and it just ends there. But same goes for Rabbit. Again, card advantage tool, same vein as Goat. Next up there, however, we have Tinkerbell. All different forms of Tink seeing play in a lot of different decks. This one's a little innocuous. It is an evasive threat, which the deck kind of does lack. There's no kind of early evasive thing aside from Pascal, which can be a little vulnerable at times. But what this helps do in a lot of cases is threaten Minnie Mouse surfers with cards like Rafiki, so that they can't get too far ahead in the Ruby Amethyst matchup, which can come up. But also, as you saw previously in the video prior to this, which I think it's going to be prior, I think I'll do it sequentially as I'm recording them, the Mufasa decks, they're playing Pongo. Some of them are just playing, 4-cost 2/3 evasive the quest for 2, and that's fine on its own too. So this stat line has proven to be, warranting inclusion in other decks as well. While this deck's a little bit different, having the ability to then take out kind of frustrating evasive characters at a moment's notice with something else with a higher strength count, like Madame M Snake, Rafiki, Fox, or anything like that, definitely warrants an inclusion there. And I do like it helping swing the tempo back against someone who's trying to race you, which this deck can struggle with, since there's no actual hard removal in this deck. There's no way to really banish a character at all. Taking out some evasive threats through combat, which you normally otherwise couldn't without kind of your opponent playing into it or letting you, by having this be in play and then buffing it to challenge in, being able to make one of your characters immediately challenges is kind of nice. And just like with everything else, it's an enters play effect, or when you play effect, so being able to reuse it with Cusco, or with, not Cusco, I was looking at Cusco, with Mim Snake or Mim Fox is pretty great. The song package, something we've kind of seen since Ursula Deceiver Ball's release. Friends on the Other Side has been a staple of every Amethyst deck I can think of. I don't know any Amethyst deck that's played less than 4 of it. I'd say it's probably in the top 5 cards in the game, close to it, maybe top 10 in that range again, with number 1 and 2 being Maui and Mim in some order. But Friends on the Other Side has been auto-included in every Amethyst deck because of it just basically being a 0-cost to draw 2, Pot of Greed or anything like that from other card games, over the years has proven to be just incredible. And yeah, no real explanation for that. And especially when you get to cast it twice, Ursula is amazing. Mother Knows Best, with no removal, again being in the game for these 2 colors that's that efficient, without considering cards like Ring the Bell, which are a little situational. This thing being a song to double up with Ursula can be an insane tempo weapon, just to help you get back into the game. And Queen's Castle, kind of rounding out the deck there, really good against a lot of the Emerald Steel decks, which we've seen pop up here and there. Steel in general and Emerald, that color pair does not have a lot of high strength characters. Generally, they have maybe Captain Hook, Smee, and to a lesser extent, they have Robin Hoods and Beasts, which are all dealt with by Mother Knows Best or other things. Locations are very hard to deal with for a lot of the Steel decks, which Steel is one of this deck's kind of weaknesses. Even though they do have Ursula to take cards like Hole in the World and Grab Swords and Storms and Strengths, Ursula, Deceiver can only take so many cards. And Queen's Castle helps kind of cement an advantage when going first if you're able to have them check everything you're doing along the way with removal spells, and you can't necessarily take all their cards. A Queen's Castle and an Ursula Deceiver by itself, just the 2-cost, is enough to threaten huge action at your opponent, and if you can just get 1 card even out of the Queen's Castle, you're already really ahead at that point. But aside from just the drawing card aspect, dealing 7 damage can be a problem. We've seen them have to play cards like Rise of the Titans just to deal with this, and Rise of the Titans is not a very good card against you in general. So really depending on what they have, you can see their hand sometimes with Ursula. You can, whether or not you know that the Queen's Castle is safe to play out, or if you just hold it and ink it, play something else. Queen's Castle helps kind of round out the deck, and is a really good threat to play into a Be Prepared because it doesn't get by Maui. Having the 7th willpower really helps there. So really overall, I think it's just a strong card and inclusion that if you expect more green steel specifically, or even amber steel, I may play a 4th one. Again, hard to say over what. Maybe the Cuscos aren't too needed. Maybe the kit, you choose to make some matchups a little bit worse to make other ones a little bit better. It's hard to really know what the correct variation of this deck looks like for any given metagame, but this is the one I'd recommend playing. And unlike the Mufasa decks, which there are a bunch of different variations, I'm going to trust in people who've played this deck through the entirety of the set and kind of my slight changes to the deck. I would say this is the only version I'd really consider. With the differences being maybe the Pinocchio should be a 4th Mother Knows Best, and maybe there should be another Queen's Castle somewhere in there. But really, it's been tested a ton. It's been spent hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, really perfecting what the core package should look like. And yeah, I can't say you go wrong with this deck. One of the decks this does not want to play against explicitly is Steel Songs. More notably, the Lantern variation, which I've popularized in a lot of ways, of Steel Songs, just because of cards like Tinkerbell Giant Fairy. That's probably the #1 card against this deck that it struggles with. And while there's not that many creatures with 1 health in this deck, mentioning the fact that there's not really any way to remove characters means that you're going to either have to challenge, or you're going to have to get challenged by the Tinkerbell, or return it to their hand, which they get to then use again, maybe in conjunction with a Grab Your Swords to really clear your board. Since everything really kind of going back to talking about how Teeth Inhibitions is not really a card I want to include in Mufasa or other Ruby decks in general, this deck has very few targets which Teeth Inhibitions actually kills. Most of these things have 3 health, so porting that back over here, Grab Your Swords isn't really too big of a threat against here, except when it's combined with Tinkerbell. So Steel Songs is something that you definitely need to look out for, and in the Rock, Paper, Scissors metagame of Steel Songs, which is Amber Steel Songs, Emerald Amethyst aggro or balance you'd call it, and Ruby Sapphire control, those things kind of do a Rock, Paper, Scissors metagame where Steel Songs beats up on this deck beats up on Blue Red crushes Steel Songs. That's the big 3 I would say for decks that are polarizing matchups, and decks that I'd expect to see a ton of at the challenges. Really, you want to be able to 2-0 your opponent a lot, so a lot of it's going to come down to matchups, and these 3 decks have very good matchups against some decks, and they have really bad matchups against others. And while that's not great for ladder climbing, because you're going to play against a wide variety of things all the time, if you want to spend 2-3 days playing 100 games online, it's not really great to pick one of those specifically for that reason. But for a tournament, it's just 9 rounds really to make that cut to day 2. And if you just dodge your bad matchups a few times, that could be enough to get you there. And we're all just looking across that finish line and get to the top 64 of this 2,000 person event. So we'll see how it goes. But this is my recommendation and take on Emerald Amethyst, and really can't go wrong here. A lot of game against a lot of decks, and just a very powerful deck that has a lot of ways to close the game, grind card advantage, and answer a lot of different board states. Yeah, thanks for tuning in for this one here. I'm going to move on to the next one here in the next video, probably on Tuesday. So look forward to that being linked in the Patreon there. And again, if you're on YouTube, this is going to be public after the event for anyone who wants to get a kind of residual on what was going on in the format and take a look at some of the archetypes which they can port over maybe to set 4. But thanks again, everyone. See you all next time.